Alrighty. Hope everybody's doing okay today. For this tutorial, it's going to be pretty small, but I just want to brush the surface of doing an API call, as well as setting up a couple of custom functions, and then applying those to a item page. If you had like an item for a marketplace, and then um, doing a checkout sort of thing. And I'm going to utilize USD, and I'm also going to utilize, as noted here, XMR or Monero, which is a cryptocurrency. So the very first thing that I want to do in this tutorial is I want to add an API call. And the API call that I'm going to be using is going to be getting the it's going to be getting the real-time value of XMR against $1 so that I can translate the total cost of the purchase for the user in USD to XMR in the event that I wanted them to pay with cryptocurrency. So first thing I want to do is I want to add my API call. I'm just going to do a single API call here. My method type is going to be get, because I want to get that value of XMR as it relates to $1. And in my efforts of finding a API for getting that value, I managed to find an API that would provide that value for free without any hard limits on how many calls that I could make, and without charging me a cost to do it. I will say that I can't remember entirely where I found this. It's been a while since I got this API, and I know that I had to make some edits to it to generate the value of XMR against $1. But there again, I can't remember exactly how I did that or what I had to do because it's been so long. But this is the URL that I'm using to get that value. And then as far as the call name goes, I'm just going to do just do that as my API call name. And there's not a whole lot that I'm going to be doing with this. I'm not setting any headers, parameters, variables, or anything like that. It's a very simple call that I'm doing. And if I go over here to response and test, and I do my test API call, I'll get a success, and it'll give me the value of XMR to $1. And if I go to Google, pull that over here real quick, and I look at $1, its equivalency in XMR, I get 0.0075. And over here we can see that it's giving me 0.0075, and it's going all the way to the let's see, what is that, 6th digit past the decimal, but really it's this number right here that's relevant. But if we look at that on Google, we see that it is generating the correct real-time value of XMR against $1. So that is working correctly. Now I want to go down here to my JSON path. I'm going to go over to recommended, because it'll give me the one that I should use, and that is what I want. So I'm going to select it and go back over to selected and see that it's in there now. And I do need to give it a name. I'll just do XMR value, and then I can add that call. Okay, so that is all I need to do for that API call. Very simple, and we will reference that later on in the tutorial. So now I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to add a couple of custom functions. So I'm going to add a function, and the first function that I want to add is I want to calculate the total USD value. Let me go back to my page over here. So this is the cost of the item, $50, and I want to multiply that against the count controller to get the total cost of the item. So one of the items is $50. If they add two of the items, then it'll be $100, three would be $150, so on and so forth. So I want to use my custom function to do that multiplication. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to name my function, and I'm going to do USD total multiply, just for reference. And I'm going to set that as an integer. So when calculating my USD values, I'm not going to use anything beyond the decimal point. I'm just going to use whole numbers, so 50, 100, 150. I'm not going to do anything with change, so I'm not going to do anything like $100.25 or 150 cents. I'm just going to use everything to the left side of the decimal point. So I'm going to set that as an integer. If I were going to use a decimal point, then I'd want to set it as a double. All right, and now I'm going to add an argument. Actually going to add two. The first argument I'm going to add is the counter, and that'll be the count controller widget value, and that'll be an integer. And then argument 2 will be the product price. So if the product is $50, and that'll be an integer, because again, I'm not going to use decimal points in this. All right, so now I've got these, I've got my title, and then I've got my, I believe that my return value is integer. So I've got my title up here as an integer, I've got my counter as an integer, and I've got my product price as an integer. And now I need to actually add the function code in here below this line. And because I do have null values set as nullable, I do need to add the null code in here. Right now, these things are not set to be nullable, so you can click on this little blue balloon looking thing and add a null check, which is that exclamation point, and it needs to be added again here. So that's good to go. So since I do have my arguments set as nullable, I needed to indicate such in my code, which is that little exclamation point after each argument. So what this code is saying is that I want to return the value of the counter multiplied times the product price. So again, very, very, very simple function that I've set up here. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and I'm going to check for errors. All right, no errors found. Something important to note that really drove me kind of crazy for a while until I figured out what the issue was, is that when you're checking for errors on any of your custom code, if you have any errors up here in any other parts of your app, so if you have like an action in your app that is not working correctly and it's throwing one of these errors, you need to resolve all of these errors throughout your app before you can check for errors within your custom code. If you try and check for errors while you have other errors present, it will not run the check. You'll tap on it and it'll do nothing. And for a long time, I figured there was something wrong with my code or something wasn't written right. So I'd rewrite it, trying to figure out what in the world was going on. And it really drove me nuts for a really long time why it wasn't checking for errors, because you can't compile your app until you check for errors on your custom code. And so once I figured out that I had to clear out all of these errors first, then I could check for these errors, and that resolved the issues. So just a little tip and trick there for anybody that's encountering similar problems. So the next function that I want to add is essentially the same thing as this function. We're still doing multiplication, but we're going to multiply by a different set of numbers. So I'll just go ahead and add another function here, and I'm going to title this function let's see here. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna title this function as let's see, I'm gonna do XMR USD multiply. And that's going to be set as a double because XMR is represented by a decimal, because you can have a number in XMR that only has values to the right of the decimal rather than to the left, or you could have it on both the left and right side. So we definitely want to be able to return the value as a decimal, so set it as a double. And then I'm going to add my first argument, and that's going to be my total USD value, which, since I am working with integers only for USD, I'm going to set that argument as an integer. And then my second argument, I'm going to set that as the XMR rate. So that would be the API result that I'm going to get from my API call. And so I will set that as a double, since it is getting a decimal point reference. Okay, now I want to grab my code here. And you can see that the code is virtually the same as it was in our other function that we set up. We're just multiplying these arguments rather than the count controller and the USD value. So whenever this function runs, it'll return the total value of total USD times the current XMR rate against $1 US. All right, so I can save that function now, and I can check for errors on that. Okay, so earlier today, I was doing some function testing, and I noticed that it seems Flutterflow may be having an issue here. If I try and go into test function, let's just do total USD. Let's do that. Let's do it 50, and we'll do that. And I run that test. It has been giving me 0 every single time, which is not right. It should be giving me the total value there. And of course, if I go, oops, I haven't made any changes. I don't know why it's, save that. If I go over here to something a little bit more simple as far as what numbers we should get, I'm just going to do 2 and then 50. So my test result should be 100. But it is also showing 0. And I was wondering what was going on, because I know that my code is correct. I've got no errors. I've got this code in other places that's working fine. And so I went ahead and I actually ran a test build and then tested these things in the test build, and it worked out fine. It's all functioning correctly. So something is wrong with Flutterflow's test function for your test over here. So if you go to test your function in here and it's just showing 0, don't automatically assume that something's wrong with your code. Be sure to test your entire build first and see if maybe it's Flutterflow that's having the problem. Okay, so those things are set up correctly now. We've got our API call in here, so we're all good to go there. So now we can go over here to begin setting these things up and make them call those functions in that API call on this site. So if I were setting up a real marketplace, I obviously would have all these values tied into a collection, and they would be set dynamically, but we don't have any of this tied to a collection, so we're going to set them manually for the most part. So I'm going to leave that as 50, and we're just going to assume that this item is $50 for one of them. But we want to display the total running value of the cost of the item against how many of the item the user wants to purchase. So I'm going to go to this button first, and I'm going to set the text here as a variable. I'm going to do combine text, and the first thing I'm going to put is add to cart, just like what they have there. And I'm going to open parenthesis, and then I'm going to set text field number 2. And I'm going to set that as my custom function, and I'm going to do the USD total multiply. So for the counter, I'm going to do a variable value on widget state, and I'm going to grab the count controller here. And then product price, since I'm not pulling anything from the back end, I'm just going to set this manually as 50. And I do want to set the number formatting. I'm just going to do compact. Since I'm not working with decimals, I'm going to display as currency, and I'm going to set that as a $sign. And then I'll add another text box, and I will close my parenthesis there. All right, so when we go into test mode and we add or remove the number of items we want to buy, this number will reflect that times 50, and it'll change. Okay, so that's set up now. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and put some actions on this button down here. And the very first action that I want to do is I want to call my API, and I'm going to pass it to the next page. Now, in theory, I could go over here, this page that we're going to be working with, and I could do a page level action and call the API that way. But the issue is that sometimes an API call happens instantaneously. Other times it can take milliseconds or seconds or even minutes if it's super slow, which that's not ideal. And in which case you could get an error when trying to build your page, where it'll throw an error saying that it encountered a null value, because this value is going to be looking for a result from our API call. And if it is not providing that API value, then it could throw an error and cause issues for your build. So we're actually going to initiate the API call on the press of this button, and we're going to do the API call first so that it'll run the call, it'll get the result before it moves on to the next set of actions. So we will create an action and we'll set it as API call, and we're going to choose the API call that we set up here. You can define this as however you want it to be, your action output variable, or you can just leave it as what they put in there themselves, which is what I'm gonna leave it as, which is API result yi4. And you can see whenever I created the API call, it automatically created a condition for me, and that is to check for whether the API call succeeded or failed. Now, if it succeeded, we'll run with our layout of our actions and what we wanted to do. If it fails, you can have it go ahead and go to the next page and just not display the result that it's looking for. However, again, you may throw a null value error, so you probably don't want to do that. My opinion here would be to actually put in an alert dialog and say something like error occurred, and then, please try again. That way, the user would be prompted to press the checkout button again. They may not necessarily know what error happened, but they'll be prompted to press that button again. Now, assuming that the API call succeeded, we want to go over here and add an action. And it's going to be a navigate to action, and we're going to navigate to our checkout page. And I'm just going to leave that stuff the way it is. So now I'm going to set a couple of parameters that I want to pass. The first one is I want to pass the USD total. And we'll set that as an integer. And then the second one is I want to pass the API result. And that'll be set as a double because, again, that API result is going to be an XMR value, which is dependent upon a decimal. So we'll set it as a double. All right, so now let's pass those. So for the USD total reference, since again, we are not working with a backend collection where we could fill this information if we wanted to within our action flow. earlier on in the process, we are actually going to run the function again here. So we go down to custom function, we do USD total multiplier. And then for the counter, we would set that to the count controller. And then we would set this as 50. So now that'll pass the total USD value to the next page. And then for the API result, we're going to do a value here, and we're going to grab our action output from that successful API call. And there's that API result, YI4. And then for the API response options, I'm going to set it to the JSON body. I'm going to do the path, and then I'm going to set it to that path that I set when we created the API. Okay, so now it's going to pass the current XMR rate as it is equal to $1 US. And I'll pass that to the next page. So those two things are set up now, so I'm just going to terminate against those. So that is all good to go. So now we can go to this page where we're receiving page parameters, we're receiving the USD total, and we're receiving the API result. So in this first box up here, total USD, we're going to set that as a variable, and we're going to set it to the USD total reference. And we will do the number format, and just do compact, and I will put a $sign in here. Okay. Now for the total XMR value, I'm going to go in here and do a variable, and then we're going to grab our custom function for that, which is the XMR USD multiply. And total USD, we'll grab that from the parameter that we pushed. And then XMR rate, we'll grab that from the API result that we pushed over to this page. And then number formatting, I'm going to set it as a decimal. I'm going to do a period for decimal and leave the rest the way it is. Okay, so now we will get our total USD value, and we will get our total XMR value as it is equal to our total USD value. And then, of course, if we wanted the user to pay in XMR, we could put like do like a text field, and we could set that as our XMR address, you know. We do it like that, and then you could set this to selectable so they could copy and paste that address into their wallet to send the money to you, or you could do a QR code if you wanted to do the same thing essentially, except they scan it. And then you'd set the value as your XMR address. So a couple of things you can do with that, but again, those sorts of things are not relevant here. We're just worried about these numbers generating correctly based off of the button click on the previous page. So I'm going to go ahead and run a test, and I'm going to pause the video while that generates here. And then once that's good to go, we will we'll look at the setup and show how everything works on that end. Okay, so the test load has finished here. So we've got our count controller and our price. So this price down here, that 50, should change as I change the count controller. So you can see that's working, just as we expect it to. Now, I'm going to leave it at 250. I'm going to click Add to Cart. And we can see that it pushed 250 over here. That's correct. And it gave us the total XMR value as it translates to USD. And of course, we can go and we can check in here to make sure that's showing correctly. So 250 USD is equal to 1.88 XMR. And 250.188 XMR. So we are getting, our API is calling the correct value. It's multiplying against the total USD and giving us the total XMR. So that's working exactly as we want it to. So again, that is that is just a very, very basic rundown of implementing some very simple functions and doing a very simple API call, and then combining those two things inside the app to generate some numbers on the end user side. So hopefully that's helpful to some folks for kind of getting started in that field. I'll take a look at doing some other tutorials later on today. Take care.